everybody. It's Michelle Garvan here again to help you with your unit HLTAHA005. We're just going to start. I've got Catherine with us tonight. Catherine, can you hear me all right? Can you give me a hands up if you can hear, please? Hoping Catherine can hear. Oh, okay. All right. So last week when we did HLTAHA003, I mentioned that we had some YouTube clips that were available to view. I'm hoping that you might have had a chance to have a look at those. If they weren't up, I'm pretty sure Sarah said she was able to get them up or was getting them up for you. They'll be a really good assistance for you because we're going to be working with this unit as into giving a physio program to help people with their mobility. So some of the things that we're going to go through in those YouTube clips are telling you about the equipment to be used and also to get someone up out of their chair and take them to the gym and some of the exercises you might do with them. So it will be helpful tonight as well. There's also a book that's been uploaded into your Moodle, which is a physiotherapy book, which actually gives you some exercises that would be used by the physiotherapist. Okay, you can't hear very well. Sorry, Catherine. Just let me see. I might be able to turn that volume up a little bit. So it will go. Can you hear me now, Catherine? Let's try again. Can you hear me better now? That should be better. The microphone's in a better position. Wonderful. All right. Okay. So just to repeat what I was just going through, that there is a book that's been uploaded into your Moodle, and it's a physio book, which actually has some physio exercises that would be kind of exercises that would be given to a client to help them with their mobility and to help them with their recovery if they've had an injury or an illness. So that would be the type of program that the physio would give to you, and you would be actually helping clients to do for them to get better with their mobility. All right, so you'd actually be helping to put them through that program. Okay, so if you can get a chance to have a look at that, because some of that's actually going to make sense when we go through some of this unit tonight. Okay. All right, so we're just going to have a look at this to start with. When I've done some marking on this unit in the past, there's been a few little mistakes, mainly the same thing as what I sort of said, I talked about last week. It's just making sure you read the question properly, because sometimes if you read it and you rush into it, it's easy to misunderstand, and you might actually put some of the things that don't actually really answer the question properly, and we need to see that you're actually answering the question, okay, to be deemed competent in these units. All right, so the first one is your physiological effects and the benefits of active functional exercise. So what that's talking about is not just the active functional exercise, but how it's good for their well-being to be doing some exercise. And what you're going to be looking at, this question is actually asking you to explain what an active functional exercise is. All right, so what we're looking for is to explain what a functional exercise is and what it's actually going to do for your body. So it's not just, if you can not just list an exercise that you think is a functional exercise, what we're looking for is an explanation of what this exercise is actually going to do for somebody that's actually having an exercise program given to them. So just as a little bit of a heads up, it's not just about the exercise, it's about giving people exercises that relate to what happens in their everyday life. So what the physio will be doing, it'll be giving them exercises to help improve with their balance and their general stability, so that they can manage at home and look after themselves at home and actually get stronger. So we're looking at finding out what kind of exercises and how it's going to affect the body in regards to everyday living, not just an exercise program. So it's the way the body moves is what we're looking at, and how that relates to the demands of everyday life. All right. So then the next type of thing we're looking at is the actual types of physical activities that there are. So you've got two different types. You've got and all this will be in your learner's guide. So we need you to look up and find the two different physical activities that are available. And there's one that's actually, is a movement one, and it's got help, and the other one is them doing it. Okay, so I've sort of explained what they are. So if you can now look to find out what they are and which ones are which. So if you can tell me those two types of activities and what happens with those, how they're put through those. With this one, I sometimes find people get a little bit confused. All right, so just have a really good read of your learner's guide. You can also go through and have a look, as I suggested last week, hop onto Google and have a look at some different types of exercises. Put in physical activities, types that are available, then put in the types of activities that a physiotherapist would give someone for a rehabilitation program to help them with gaining their strength and mobility back, and it will actually help you to understand these two different types. The ways that physical activity can support a healthy body functioning is it's not just about the exercise, it's about other things to do with our body. And if we're keeping a healthy body by doing some exercises, it's also going to have a roll-on effect to other parts of our body and actually to other systems in our body. So we sort of touched on systems in the body last week. So you'll be able to relate this now to what other kind of systems, if you're helping exercise, what other kind of systems are going to get benefit from you doing this exercise with them also. Okay, so does that make sense? So just so you can understand that the exercises aren't just helping with that physical activity of exercise, they're going to be helping with other systems in the body. How are we going there, Catherine? Can you still hear me okay? All right, so principles of biomechanics. All right, so these are getting back to Newton's laws, which a lot of us would have looked at school. Okay, they haven't changed, they're still the same. The main one that everybody remembers is, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. We all know that one, and that's really important. And it's really important when it comes to exercises, because for everything we do, you have to do the opposite. Okay, so that should help you with some of these questions as well. So you just need to look up your Newton's laws, and actually you're going to put these three laws, these are the laws of motion, into your own words if you can. Okay. There is also, I'm sure it mentions in your learner guide, the brain map. There's also a fact sheet on brain map, which gives you a lot of information as well, and you'll find some of the information that I'm talking about and what you need now in that brain map sheet. And also you can look up brain map on Google and have a look. They've got lots of stuff in there that's really helpful. Basic musculoskeletal anatomy. All right, so the skeletal system is broken down into distinctive parts or sections in our body. We need you to actually list and briefly explain them. So not only do I want you to list the sections of that skeletal system, but I want you to actually briefly explain what they do. There's also another website that you can look at, which is at www.livescience.com. and it will go through the skeletal system, and that's a really good link for you to have a look at. Part 2 of this one is is to actually, if you can, find out the amount of bones that make up each of those different sections in the skeletal system. If you can put those in, that's really good. That means that you had a really good look at it and understanding, and you'll realise that how many bones in the skeletal system, and when it's broken into these different sections, how many bones are used to make the body function. So then we're going to get down to some terms. Also, you can use this livescience.com to have a look at the terms. So this one we're looking at in this one is the term that stands for scoliosis. Now it applies to the spine, okay? So it can be any part of the spine, and we would need you to have a look what scoliosis is, describe what it looks like, and if you need to, have a look at life science and have a bit more of an understanding, get some other looks at as well as what's in your learner's guide. Then you're going to move down to your range of motion for your joints. Okay, now you'll see in that one it actually has the full term range of motion, and then it has in inverted commas your ROM. Okay, now you're going to see that ROM used quite a bit. And last week when we spoke about recording, and we're going to also in this unit, we're going to be talking about keeping client notes and recording. You need to be learning some of the terms that are going to be used, because you have to read the physiotherapist's notes. Okay, so there is a section in yours, in the learner's guide, that'll actually go through the different abbreviations and quick things that are used by physiotherapists. As I did state last week, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, massage therapists, they use slightly different ones, but a lot of the major ones like ROM are used by everybody. Okay, so ROM is the range of motion. So that's a range of motion that a joint or a part of the body is going to be able to be moved through. All right, and that's important because remember we talked about different types of physical activity, and you're going to have a look at what these parts of the body can be moved and what kind of range they have, and what you're looking at to be a good range and what we need to work on if they don't have a good range. Okay, so you need to be looking up on this question. It actually gives you an example of one of them, and it will give you an answer. So that'll help you to understand if when you have a look at it, you're a little bit unsure as to what it means by the actual joint range of motion. So have a look at it and fill this one in for me. All right. Section 4 is your basic anatomy and physiology. Okay, now I think the spine is fairly easy. It's telling you that it's broken into 3 sections. All you've got to do is tell us how many vertebrae make up each of those sections. So that's an easy one to look at. Then you've got, you're going to move down to the intervertebral disc, contains different parts. It's asking you, each disc actually is made up of different sections. All right, so you're going to have a look in your learner's guide, have a look on the web, have a look at a anatomy book if you can get hold of one. The libraries have all got them. The TAFE library has a great and a fairly extensive range of anatomy books. I think Mosby's a pretty good brand, and that's the one that's in the library. It's quite a few copies of that. It's going to give you a really good description of what this is and how the disc's broken down. Actually will give you quite clear pictures so you can actually see what it looks like and understand how that disc actually works, and it plays a very important role. So looking after your discs is really important to the health of your clients as well as yourselves, and that includes your work health and safety, how you look after your body when you're working with clients as well. I'll just slide down here. So 2 muscles that blend into the Achilles tendon. So same thing, we just need you to have a good look at those. Have a look in your anatomy book again, have a look in your learner guide. As I said last week, if anybody has any problems and you're unsure of something when you're going to do it, or you can't quite understand the questions, the girls are always here in the office for you to ring. They're only happy to help you, to explain and give you just a little bit of a help in leading you in the right direction if you're not quite on the right track. Okay, and that's what I find happens with sometimes with these questions. You might look at them and you think you're heading in the right direction and you just seem to wander off a little bit and get carried away with explaining parts of it, and then you miss the main point of what we're looking for. So just take it slowly, have a good read of them. But as I said, if you're unsure, give the girls a ring in the office. If I'm available, or Sarah, or even Alicia, any of us can help you if you need a hand. Anatomical terminology. Okay, now this one can be a little bit confusing. Just need to have a look at it slowly. Have a good read of your learner guide. Another one, go into the anatomy book, and it gives you, even some of your fitness books are really good at explaining these anatomical terminology. Okay, they can be a little bit confusing to start with, but once you get them, they make the understanding of how your exercises and how your parts of your body work, and it makes it really easy to understand how the exercises are going to help somebody with different range of motions that we're going to be getting them to do, and that the physio will be getting you to do when you're working with people. All right, so I'm not going to go into all of those, but just if you have a good look down them, okay, some of them we already know, some might be a little bit different to what you would have thought. Have a good read of them, okay, and don't rush into your answers. Listed also then is asking you to give examples of different kind of joints. So it's actually given you some parts of the body. So for example, the top one, and it gives you an example, is your radius and your ulnar joint. Okay, so if you can have a look, find where they are, see if you can work out what part of the body they are, and then work out what kind of joint it is. So find out what that joint is, what it's called, and what kind of joint it is, so that you know what kind of movement you're going to get out of it. That's really important, not just knowing the kind of joint it is, but how that joint works, so you know when you're giving someone exercises, how that exercise is going to look and how it's going to affect that joint because of the way that joint is able to move. All right, so we're looking at therapeutic exercise principles. All right, so therapeutic exercise, it's very similar to fitness exercising. They use exactly the same principles and the same kind of training. It obviously would just be modified, and it would be modified by the physiotherapist as to what the client is able to cope with. But what you're looking at is the three major categories of therapeutic exercise training. And then you need to provide us with an example of those. When marking these in the past, I've seen a little bit of confusion with these sometimes. Just have a good think about them, find out what those three types are, and then think of some exercises that you think would go with those. Have a bit of a go at doing the exercise yourself while you're answering your assessment. I always find I have to get up out of my chair if I'm at my computer and do the movements, even pretend to do the exercises. And doing that, you should be able to work out what category that exercise falls into and what kind of exercising it is. Okay, so don't be frightened to get up out of your chair and actually experiment with the exercises. The same, if we go back to the anatomical terminology, don't be frightened to get up out of your chair and do the movements. It helps to make sense. Okay, I have a very good teacher here that teaches anatomy, and he always used to have us up out of our chairs doing the things and doing the movements, and that's how it all makes sense. So don't be frightened to do it. All right, so then you're going to move down to the principles of exercise and how a program is designed. Okay, we're not expecting you to design programs. The physiotherapist will do this for you, but you need to understand it so that you can actually help your client to go through it, and how they're going to ask you questions. They're going to want to know, why am I doing this? What is it for? So you really do need to understand and to be able to explain to them. Sometimes you might find they're very resistant. We'll come across that in a couple of other questions. They're resistant to doing things, but if you can explain it in simple terms and tell them what benefit they're going to get out of following this program and how it's going to help them to stay in their own home, how they're going to become strong, they're going to be able to go back to do things, it makes it easier for them to want to do the program and follow it. So you need to be able to understand how these fitness principles and how these exercise principles and how the design works so that you can help them to understand. So the first one you're going to come across is the FITT, all right? So you're going to be looking up that to work out what those letters stand for. Okay, each of them stands for a principle of an exercise program. And we'd like you to list what they stand for and then a very short explanation of what they actually mean. Okay, it's very self-explanatory and it isn't that hard, and you're going to find that in your learner's guide, and you'll find it in, as I said, any exercise programs. Even if you put FITT into Google in your computers, it'll come up and it will give you. Sometimes people use different wording, but they usually mean the same. And it will tell you exactly what it means, and that's going to also to help you to understand how you can then put in your own words to explain what it means. There's phases to exercises too. I think most of you would know if you've ever done any kind of exercise, even if you've been a swimmer at some stage. When I write up swimming programs for my kids that swim, particularly the children that are up into squads, the swimming programs are broken up into phases. Okay, so in swimming we call it a warm-up, then we call it our main session, then we'll have a cool down. If you think about that and you have a look through your learner's guide, you're going to find these 4 phases of exercise. They sort of mean the same things as what I just said then. So you're going to look up those and understand how those phases help with an exercise program. So even though you're not writing it, the physiotherapist's writing it out. You're going to understand why we do it in that order, and you're going to be able to explain to the client when they ask why or want to know why they can't go and do something before they do something else. It's really important that you follow those phases of exercise because it's really important for the body. For example, as I said, a warm-up. So if you were to go do some stretching exercise or do any kind of strenuous exercise, but you hadn't warmed up those muscles, you can actually do damage. So it's important that you follow those phases and you understand how they work. Concepts and procedures for stepping down a treatment or an intervention. Okay, as I said, physiotherapist is going to make up your programs that you'll be delivering to clients. But if you come across a problem that there is a patient that is, say, struggling with the exercise and they actually have some symptoms that you feel are a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for, you'd be a little bit concerned about them, okay, you may step down a program, okay. We are not allowed to increase anything or change it that way, but if you find someone that is struggling, you may step it down, or you can also go and seek advice from the physiotherapist if they're close handy and ask their advice on what you would do. All right, so what we're looking for here is you're going to advise the client, if they're experiencing pain, steps that you can take to help them get through the exercise program or to reduce that pain. So what we're looking for is for you some advice that you're going to be giving and what else you would do if someone came across was experiencing pain when you were giving them their exercise program. Okay, think about the things I've just said. They're going to virtually answer most of those questions for you. When you're conducting an exercise program for a client who recently had surgery, you need to actually make sure that you've actually had a really good read of their case notes and that you understand what was happening to them, what kind of surgery they've had, how it affects them. And we're asking you in this next question what you would actually do to someone that actually complains of a problem while they're doing this exercise. So read this answer and then read this question carefully. Have a look at the part that's giving them problem and then work out what you would do to help them overcome this and what you would actually do. What is your duty of care to them, and also who you would speak to about it. So the next section we're going to get into is weight bearing and post fractures implications. All right, there's obviously implication with people that have fractures and they have to be looked after. All right, you need to have a good look at your case notes because your physiotherapist will actually be very specific, and if someone's had a fracture, what they are able to do, what they can't do, and how much weight bearing they're allowed to do if they've had a fracture. And so that's important for the exercises. It'll all be there for you. You don't have to guess. Okay, but you need to understand how that is going to help, how it's going to change what they can do, what you can do to help them, what kind of things you're going to be looking for while you're doing these things with them. So this is 5 factors that should be considered when you're mobilising a client that's had a fracture. The other thing you're doing in the next part of this one is weight bearing on an unstable fracture. What kind of things are you going to be careful of? What kind of things can go wrong if you weight bear on an unstable fracture? Okay, you need to have a really good look through your learner's guide, work out what an unstable fracture is, what's going to happen with it, and what happens if the result if that client actually has weight bearing on that unstable one. We're then going to be asking you about some professionals. Okay, you need to obtain correct information about fracture management. So we're asking you what kind of people you would be looking for to get information about that. Okay, if you sometimes the best thing to do is actually get your client's notes well and truly before, have a good look at it. If there's something that you're not sure of, physiotherapists and doctors have a habit of writing sometimes in short very unreadable language as well. Sometimes their notes aren't all that legible. So have a good look at it. If there's something you're not sure about, to get the correct information on the management of a fracture, go see. Who do you think you would go see? But go see these people and confirm what they want you to do, how you're to do it, and so you understand it. There are strict restrictions for people that have had different kind of surgeries. The one we're asking you to look at is the hip. So it's a hip replacement, and what we're asking you to is to answer 3 common restrictions that you have to watch out for following someone that's had hip replacement. So it should be listed in their case notes. The exercises should be very specific to what they can do, but it is really important that you guys understand the restrictions of someone with hip replacement, just in case there's a mistake and someone has you going to do something with someone that isn't what should be acceptable for a hip replacement. You should have an idea what kind of things you can and can't do with them. To explain why bones are immobilized following a fracture, we're looking at why do we immobilize? Why do we do non-weight bearing and different kind of things for someone that's had a fracture? We want you to tell us what kind of things you're looking at to prevent from happening and what's going to help them with it getting better. I'm going to be talking about some mobility aids as part of this section as well. And I did mention earlier, if you can actually have a look at the YouTube clips on the YouTube channel, it's the Allied Health YouTube channel. There is a clip that actually goes through, and I think I've also made a PowerPoint that actually covers the different kind of equipment that we use. I will find out if that one's been posted anywhere. If not, we'll look into that one. It's a PowerPoint that just goes through the different kinds of equipment that we do use when we're doing a program with somebody and how those bits of equipment are used and the kind of things they're used for. And this is very pertains really to this as well, because it's talking about what pieces of equipment you would use for total weight or non-weight bearing, what you would use for partial weight bearing, and how those bits of equipment can help you to help stabilize somebody that's got these kind of problems. So these can help. So we're going to be asking you to answer this question with what kind of mobility aids you would use post-fracture. Okay, so if we can get that PowerPoint up within the next couple of days, I'll check that it's fine to go up. It's going to really answer these for you. Some conditions that affect people's mobility, okay, you need to have a look through your learner's guide. You can also Google conditions, so the illnesses, not just conditions, illnesses, different diseases that affect people's mobility. Okay, so it's not just having fractures, it's not just having surgery. There are other things out there that are going to affect people and their mobility and how you're going to be able to help them. So you need to have a look up those for me and have a look what kind of things can affect mobility. All right, it's actually broken into a couple of different groups. So have a look and work out which groups affect mobility. I actually want you to list 4 conditions that can affect mobility, and then you're going to roughly explain how they do affect it. So you're going to find 4 conditions, 4 illnesses, and work out then and then tell me how those conditions or illnesses affect someone's mobility. Risks for decreased mobility. Okay, you're going to list 3 physical effects of reduced mobility. Okay, so in looking at answering this one in the past, people have got a little bit confused with this one. What we're looking at is something that's happened because they've got reduced mobility. Things happen to their body, there's changes. Okay, what 3 physical effects come about because someone has reduced mobility? Think about even if you sit still for a long time and you're not moving, what happens when you get up? What happens? There's things that happen to even perfectly healthy people. If they sit still for a long time, when they go to move, they have problems. Okay, it's also with work health and safety, sitting in front of your computer for too long, get up and move around. If you don't, you'll find you had problems with some of these things. So have a look, see if you can list 3 physical effects that are caused by someone who has reduced mobility. All right. Then you're going to list 3 preventative strategies that a physiotherapist or an allied health person, professional or assistant can utilise to prevent someone from having that decreased mobility. Now, we've been sort of working on that the whole way through to get to here. Everything we've touched on to start with, ranges of motion, how the body works, the anatomical movement of the body, all of these things are heading towards getting towards this. Okay, what you can do to prevent people from having decreased mobility. So those exercise programs we talked about, how they're made up, the things that you use for the exercise programs, okay, they're going to help to prevent someone from having decreased mobility. So you need to look up the preventative strategies. Psychological effects of a disability due to an injury or a disease and the strategies used to cope with these. Okay, these you really need to think about them. Most of you would know them, but people often forget the other parts that happen to someone when they've got a disability or they've had an injury or even a disease, how it can affect them, how it can affect the family as well. So we need you to look at 3 possible psychological effects of reduced mobility. So what kind of things can happen to someone, how they can be feeling, what other things besides maybe the lack of movement, what other things are they going to be starting to struggle with if this is a long-term thing and they're having trouble with an injury. So we're looking at these 3 possible psychological effects of reduced mobility. Signs of an adverse reaction to different programs. Okay, some clients are going to not manage all that well with some of the exercises that they may be given. It's not that the physiotherapist has given them the wrong exercise. It could just mean that there's something going on in their body at that time that's not going to cope with the exercises they're giving. So you're going to be looking for what kind of things might happen to someone that's having a reaction to a treatment. And then we're going to ask you, how would you deal with that? So how would you deal with it? We sort of talked about that briefly before too. And also what you would do about it. Okay, remember recording and documenting is really important. And this is one of the incidents where that's really important. So I've sort of given you a clue to part of the answer to that one as well. Okay, then getting down into this one, we're talking about, we're giving you some scenarios of what's going to happen and what could happen if you're running a program. And we're going to be talking about different bits of machinery that a physiotherapist might use. You need to understand how they work. As I said before, if you can understand how they work, what they're used for, and you come across a client that is reluctant to do or to go ahead with some kind of treatment, if you can understand and help them to understand how this is going to help them in their recovery, it's going to be better for them. There are some of these, some of these therapies that we can use that, like the above question, you're going to get a reverse reaction. You need to understand what are some of the problems that can happen with some of the treatments that be given. What are some of the adverse reactions that might pop up? And so when someone tells you they have something, you know that that could be an adverse reaction that is caused by a treatment that you're going to be given. So looking at this one, it's actually a TENS machine. Okay, so what we're looking for is for you to tell us what the TENS machine is. Then you need to have a look and tell us what kind of reaction a client could have. And also what we're doing is we're looking at 2 contraindications for the use of a TENS machine. So when you're going through your learner's guide and you're looking at a TENS machine, it'll actually give you reactions, allergic reactions that people can get, what causes it, and it'll also give you contraindications. So your contraindications are things that you can't use in relation to that person or that injury. Okay, so have a really good read of those. It's really important that you understand. The Australian Physiotherapy Association, it's a really, really good idea to actually get it up on the web and have a look at a lot of the areas in it. Okay, so there's 9 principles of the Code of Conduct of the Association of Physical Therapy, the Physiotherapist Association, the APA. It's actually quite interesting. We're going to ask you, there's more than 9, but we're going to ask you to list 9 principles of that Code of Conduct. So you need to understand the codes of conduct that the physiotherapist has to abide by when they're treating a client and the guidelines that they follow. Okay. The next section is your legal and ethical considerations. A client, this is like another scenario. So the client's going to be asking you to meet them socially after work. So you need to describe the most appropriate action that you would take if a client wanted to meet you socially after work, someone that you're actually looking after, even someone that you've had within the past. There are ethical considerations and legal considerations, and they are very important. So you need to go back and have a good look and a good read of your legal and ethical considerations. That will also pop in the association guidelines as well as it will be in your learner's guide so that you understand them. This goes into a couple of different scenarios. You've got one, which is A and B, different answers to those. Okay, B actually will then ask you to write a yes answer for the one that is pertaining to what that kind of behaviour is that that client and the co-worker are having. Also policies and procedures. Each state has their own. A lot of them are repetitive, they are the same, but you need to have a look at the different acts and the different policies and procedures for each state, and we're asking you to list them. So you need to look them up and find out what the policies and procedures are and list what they are for each state. Then we're going to be asking you to list 4 factors that need to be considered when documenting clinical records. Now, we've touched on those earlier, some of the things that you're going to be looking for when you're recording or when you go back to look at notes that have been recorded. So think about when we discussed that a bit earlier, some of the things you're looking at when you're looking at the notes before you take somebody for an exercise program. If you can understand how important those notes are, it's also now going to help you that you're recording and making notes, what kind of things you need to be recording in your notes, what things you would add, what things you would document, and how else it could be recorded if it's something that's a little bit more than just they didn't want to do their exercises. All right. So then we're going to go down to the next one. We're going to be asking you to have a look at some medical conditions. All right. Here we go. So, all right. So, identifying some medical conditions. These will be in your learner guide. Also, this is another one. They are really good to look up in your anatomy books, and also just get on Google and put them in and find out what the disease is. If you read these and you don't know what the disease is, have a look, find out what it is, understand it. Then it's going to make it a bit more easy for you to understand what it means by notifiable. Okay, so you need to have a look at the Communicable Diseases Network in Australia, the CDNA, and find out how that works, how you do record it, and what things need to be recorded. So we're asking you of these lists of all these different diseases, which ones of them are notifiable. Okay, some of them are, some of them aren't. So you'll need to have a look and understand what the disease is and then have a look at it. So section 17, factors that facilitate an effective and collaborative working relationship. List 3 allied health professionals that you would need to work with collaboratively during your position as an allied health assistant. So as your role as the allied health assistant, you're going to actually come across a lot more than just a physiotherapist. Okay, we need you to actually look into what other health professionals are out there that you're going to have to work with, and the better you can work with them and collaborate with them, the better the results for the clients you're working with. Okay, if you can have a good relationship with the other health professionals and work with them and get advice from them, you're going to have a lot better benefit for the client. So understand what other health professionals are out there that you can turn to for advice. Okay, it mightn't be someone that you actually come across, but you might find something that you've picked up with when you're working with someone that you might like to recommend or speak to the physiotherapist about, that you think might be beneficial for them also. So see if you can work out a list of health professionals who you need to work with collaboratively. 3 communication barriers that might affect a working relationship between you and your client. So actually have a look and have a think about things that might pop up that you might come across when working with somebody to help them with their exercises that might make it hard for you to actually work with them. Okay, think about what kind of things they might have going on. We talked about a couple of questions earlier about how people are affected by lack of mobility, and it's not just the lack of movement or whatever, it affects other things. These other things are going to actually help you to actually understand some of the communication barriers also that could affect your relationship between the client and yourself. What can you do to help overcome these barriers, and how to understand why they have these barriers to actually wanting to do the exercise program with you, okay, and maybe not being able to understand. So have a look at what some of these barriers would be, understand them, and that's going to help you when you're actually out there on your work placement or when you're going to the real world as a job, understanding some of the different things you're going to come across. And believe me, you will come across lots of barriers to someone wanting to do exercises with you. So if you can understand what you can do to help them overcome these barriers, it's going to make for a lot easier working relationship. Record keeping practices and procedures in relation to diagnostic and therapeutic programs. Okay, health professionals should record a history and assessment in their client health records. According to the Australian Physiotherapy Standards lists 3 examples of physical findings that should be documented. Okay, so thinking about what kind of things that you come across that need to be documented when you're writing those notes. Okay, so it might be something to actually do with the movement, how a portion of their body looks, how it responds to exercises, and what other kind of things you might be looking at. Remember when we did 003 last week, we also talked about when you're monitoring people, you're not just looking at their colour and things like that. You might be able to use bits of equipment that are going to help you to help monitor how they're going. Looking at these physical findings that can be documented, you might need to use some of these other things to help document and to give a good recording of what happened while these people were doing their exercises. www.physiotherapyasm.au document folds is going to give you an idea of how health professionals record, and also what their mission statement is. So you need to read this so that you can understand what the mission statement is for recording and what are the factors that need to be recorded. So have a look through that, looking through your learner's guide, purpose of the clinical record keeping and why it's important and what it can also be used for. Okay, it's really important that notes are accurate and they are kept up to date, not just for you, but for the next person that might come across them, but for other things that might crop up later on to do with legal issues as well. They're very important. So the purpose, physiotherapists who work with work cover clients, that's someone who's been hurt at work and they're under workers' compensation. Physiotherapists who actually treat these clients have to use a different recording system, put it that way. We need you to have a look into that and understand what kind of recording system a physiotherapist might use. And actually then I need you to actually explain in your own words how this system of recording works for someone on workers' comp and what it's used for. Right. All right, so actually the next part we're going to get into is just the practical demonstration. So that's all we really have time for tonight. Have you got any questions that you'd like to ask me, Catherine? Is there something that when we've been going through this you would like to know a bit more about, or I could explain it a little bit more fully? Got a few minutes if you just want to ask anything. Type it down the bottom for me and I'll try and answer it for you. I can see you're typing, so we'll just wait and see what it is. Nope, all good? Okay. All right, so as I said, but if there's anything I've missed that you're not sure of, and when you're coming to do the assessment, if you haven't already started that yet, don't be backwards in coming forwards to ringing us here and asking us any questions. All right? All right, well, have a lovely evening. This has been recorded, so if you want to go back and touch on anything, or if anybody else from the group wants to have a look at it later and have a listen, it'll be available for you. Thank you very much for tonight, and I'll see you next time.